It's another rainy photo walk. 4 in a row, Neil, I think. Yes, 4 in a row. Have you been counting? I know I have. Let's get I don't have a Barney with me today. No Sir Barkalot. I went for a walk with him early this morning when it wasn't raining quite so much. And then I said, listen, I tell you what, have some R&R at home while I go and do today's photo walk. He seemed okay with that, looking out the window. So let me get a sketchbook photograph to start the show. What do we have? Got my X100V. My travelling companion is with me. And that can't be right. 500 ISO, 1600... no, here we go. F4, 500 ISO, 125th shutter speed. Just a picture along the rather dank path to start the show. A sketchbook photograph just to show you where I am today.
Photographers have this way of changing truth by allowing us to experience things in ways that are impossible otherwise. And lenses can do this, whether it's in photography or with a telescope or a microscope. These are not organic ways of seeing. They're not possible ways of seeing, even for us, given the natural apparatus of the eye. And so we play with that. I am particularly drawn, as you were suggesting, to these moments where I can reveal things that people who are around them all the time have never seen.
That's Stephen Seidenberg, and I certainly think today there'll be moments of my conversation with him that may well challenge the way you think about, and I'll say this with inverted commas, just taking pictures. You'll recognise the word just come up during our chat. Stephen Seidenberg is an American photographer, a philosopher, and author. His work combines photography, philosophy, and poetry, often exploring the themes of memory, isolation, and the human condition. Whoa, Neil, hang about. You've gone all intellectual on us this week. I'll level with you. My favourite phrase, number 11 in the book. My imposter syndrometer was on a level it hasn't reached in a good long while. Why, you might ask? Well, me talking to somebody who, to use a phrase from one of my favourite books ever, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, quoting Marvin actually, I was talking to somebody with a brain the size of the universe as far as I was concerned. But it was a case of what will I possibly have to offer in a conversation with this man, Stephen Seidenberg. This is... there's a moment during many interviews when I think, and this is strictly now between you and I, don't tell anybody else, when or where I think they're going to find me out, you know. I'm not quite worthy enough to be doing this interview or having this chat. And this does go back many, many, many years. Wearing my radio presenter's hat now, it goes back many moons when I got given the somewhat poisoned chalice of presenting the arts show on the BBC's radio station based in the city of Cambridge. A definite, recognised seat of learning in the world's consciousness. It was definitely a show to have as well, but it was my first on the BBC, and so I was hoping for a somewhat easier gig. Because this is a city, Cambridge this is, built on Latin mottos and people who wear tweed underwear and are very, very clever generally. So yes, Cambridge, and me doing the arts show in the afternoon, I was well aware of the arts scene in the city. You've got national treasures like Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie. They belonged, what was it? It wasn't an arts circle. It was a collective. Footlights, that was it. Is it a collective? Cambridge Footlights, quite famous for the comedy. And then there's Sylvia Plath and E.M. Forster. And you can't forget photography in all this. Cecil Beaton, he studied and he lectured in Cambridge. But I did learn this from my time in Cambridge. If you don't understand, ask. And if the stuff of learning challenges you more than you think that your brain was possibly invented for, then listen a bit closer. And I think having now edited this, you can definitely hear me doing just that. So, yes, I do think that what today's conversation brings is challenge and an introduction to work that you may not instantly understand, maybe in the terms of the why that we talk about so often. As you can probably hear, it's a tad hard for me to sum up what you're about to hear today, but I do know this. I went away reasonably well, C word again, challenged, and somewhat more engaged than I thought I'd be able to be. And if that sounds like I should really have a word with myself about imposter syndrome and self-doubt and self-criticism, then so be it. We are nothing if not a work in progress. As in one particular letter on the show today is going to underline, we don't often philosophize on this show, so I'm delighted to be able to invite a guest onto the show who can certainly do that.
Today on the Photo Walk.
This was there, light reflected off of it, came through this lens, exposed this chemically sensitive film, and this is how we end up with this thing. When people move out of these old houses, there aren't the skilled workers to repair them, to restore them, and it's expensive, and the land is not so valuable, so people tear them down. Even if it's contextual, you see a joke, you see a visual joke by decontextualizing something. Photographers have this way of changing truth by allowing us to experience things in ways that are impossible otherwise. I would change it a little bit and say a reader, and this is true as a photographer too, is someone who sees images or who reads work and is moved to reciprocity.
That's Stephen Seidenberg, my guest on the Photo Walk today. Along the way, I'll also be reading some of your letters, the moments and thoughts you sent in about life and what you notice when you head out with a camera. A show shaped just as much by you as the wonderful, wonderful guests who speak with me each week. I'll dip into the mailbag in a moment to see what is waiting for us. But first, I want to say a proper thank you to the Patreon members of the community, the Extra Milers, because this show simply would not be here without you, week after week. And I mean that. Every week there is an extra show for patrons called The Extra Mile, for the Extra Milers, as you're called. And this week's features more of Stephen talking about this thing that we do, photography, the philosophy of photography, the day-to-day really. Thank you also to my sponsor arthelper.ai, which helps you to sell your photos online by making the posts and the mock-ups and the marketing emails for you. We talk about this, I know, but really, if you have been thinking, I've got some pictures and I want to try and sell them online, but I've got no idea how to go about it, that's where arthelper.ai dip in and help you out. They do the tricky bits for you, and you can get 30 days free with the code PHOTOWALK when you go to arthelper.ai. Right, on the show today, an invite to take part in a new feature for 2026. We've mentioned it already in the last couple of weeks. It's a community feature which I've titled Here and There. I'll tell you more in a moment. Andrew Larking has written in about self-criticism and self-confidence, which, after my walking introduction just a moment ago, is very pertinent, I think, although what Andrew goes on to say within his letter today on this show, so around about halfway through the show, give or take, absolutely took the wind out of my sails. Richard Rawlings on neurodiversity, and Jim Farmer is finding alligators in the backyard, sort of. So shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, check. Some spare film or perhaps an extra SD card, check. Hand warmers. What? Yeah, cold, wet, rainy days. Hand warmers, that's what you need. Check. Well, let's walk then. I'm just aware that when I was talking to you a moment ago, walking along this path, that I said we don't often philosophize on the show. That's actually not true, is it? Every single week we have a why question. Perhaps we don't so formally philosophize, but we definitely do consider the philosophy of what we do every single week when I ask the why question. And I tell you what, today's why, not that I want to get ahead of myself, but today's why, well, as you can imagine, it's going to be, I think, rather special. It's your stories that give this community its real heart. The things that you notice while walking, thinking and making photographs. Or not even making them, sometimes just walking. This podcast is a place to slow things down for a bit. And you don't even have to call yourself a photographer to be here. If you like a good wander and paying attention to the world, you're already part of this whole thing. So where do we start? It's actually not with a letter this week. Do you remember, it does sort of start from a letter. Do you remember the letter from Jade Lee about the photo exchange she'd been having with a photographer friend of hers called Yasuko in Japan? Just in case you haven't heard that episode, I do need to fill in some gaps, I think. I'll remind you or tell you for the first time. It was, Yasuko from Japan. Jade had been living in Japan for a while. She's an Australian, but she'd been living there, and Yasuko was one of her very good friends. And when Jade had to go back to Australia, or decided to move back to Australia, then she kept contact with Yasuko by sending photographs from Australia. There's a brook here, hold on. You hear it? It's going to be a jump. Stand by, it could have wet foot any second. And there we go, across. Yasuko, she sent pictures back to Jade. And that's the way they pictorially kept in touch, really. And I had a letter from Jade, and I read that one out a couple of weeks ago. And I suggested at the time that perhaps as a community, we could do the same or a similar thing and connect with a photo pen pal from a different country to show our part of the world. And if that sounds an interesting idea, well, this is what I'm proposing, and there's still a chance for you to take part. The feature for the photo walk is called Here and There. I did think long and hard about it. That's the one I've come up with, because you're here, they're there, but when you exchange the pictures, well, you know what I mean. I'm keeping the concept very simple. 2 people making and sharing 2 pictures each month to show where you live, what you do, and so on. Could be your work, could be your walks, could be your neighbourhood. It's pretty open. The idea is your local canvas, the place where you live, may not necessarily seem exotic or different to you because you see it day in, day out. But to a stranger, it holds a very different kind of intrigue. Now, to do this, I'll need to link you up with another photographer, obviously, a sort of digital photo pen pal. Ideally, and we've managed this so far, I want to connect you with somebody from a different country. I'm going to let the feature continue under its own steam between you and your photo pen pal until nearer to Christmas. Maybe I'll even check in during the year when I think I know I'll make a feature of it for the show, sharing some of the pictures that you've both made and perhaps some stories along the way. So, the suggestion is, and I think it's fairly flexible, but I'm suggesting 2 pictures a month so it doesn't run out of steam. But if you both decide to share some more, well, that's equally fine. So, we've had a great reaction, I think, just from what felt like a cursory mention to begin with. 20 of our community have said they'd like to link up, so that's 10 pairs of photo pen pals so far. And it didn't have what I would call a big launch as such. There's just a couple. Jeanette Smith from the States is going to be talking to, sharing pictures with rather, Mariette Detroit in Japan. Sean Spencer in the States. David Rowan from Scotland is his digital photo pen pal. Mike Taylor, again from the States, will be exchanging pictures with Hegard the Dane, Lars Hegard. So, there we go. We've got 7 other pairs that have all been joined together. So if you'd like to take part in this, drop me a line to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. You'll need to give me permission to join you up with a digital pen pal in our feature called Here and There. And I tell you what, we'll leave this open for a couple more weeks, and then I think we'll have everybody that's going to take part in this feature. So good luck. I'm going to have a go myself, actually. Interesting thing, especially over the next month, for me at any rate, is that I'm not in the UK. I'll be in different places: Austria, Bangladesh, and India. So your travels are included in this as well. So stories@photowalk.show, couple of weeks, and we'll have all our pairs organised. I'm looking forward to hearing from you for Here and There, and also checking with our photographic photographic world digital pen pals. That's why I called it Here and There, to be honest, later on during this year. God, there's water. Did you hear that? Falling, I might have edited it out, actually, falling all over the microphone. God, dear. Right. Reflections this week on its own podcast channel now. Just look up Reflections. It's got some interesting topics awaiting you. They're short 10-minute-ish chats about the world through a photographer's eyes, i.e. mine. We start the week suggesting that you're never ready in a two-parter across Monday and Tuesday. Then Wednesday was all about the recovering perfectionist. It was a phrase I heard. Was it you that told me it? Because I definitely heard it from somebody. And then yesterday, a lighter look at aging, starting with a dead parrot, of all things. And then today's is called You Stupid Boy, which plays on these thoughts of self-criticism that I introduced at the start of the show. But that's on Reflections today. Go look for Reflections on your podcast player app. It's all over the podcast sphere, and you should be easily able to find us. Some feedback from last week's show, one from Richard Rawlings. I should probably say that last week's guest, the Pulitzer Prize winner, the photojournalist Carl McNaughton, had a conversation that went in lots of different directions. Like today's in some respects, that I wasn't quite expecting. In this case with Carl, he'd recently had a diagnosis of ASD, which had, as you hear or heard in our chat, changed his relationship with how he thinks about himself as a photographer and a parent and as a partner and human. It was fascinating, I think. So thank you, Carl, for trusting us to open up in that respect. So from Richard: hi, Neil. Interesting interview with Carl McNaughton. I was identified as autistic a few years ago, actually. I can't really talk about art as an autistic person because it's all I've ever known. Everything has come from that place. But it was good to hear someone going through the some things that I've been through. The only thing that is different is I don't tend to tell people. I don't want to be labelled, if that makes sense. But I do believe that photography is a great leveller, and we all make images through our own lens. If you put two images side by side, it would be difficult to say who was and who was not autistic. What it does do is make me have difficulties around people. And so camera clubs and other social events can be a real nightmare. I did a wedding once and had to lie down afterwards. Outside of all that, it's all good. Regards, Richard. Richard, sometimes I do weddings and feel I have to have a lie down as well. Or find a darkened corner somewhere. But thank you for your mail on that. It was an interesting episode. It was fascinating to talk to Carl about that, and I've had a few messages on email since that show. Another one that you're going to hear shortly. So my guest, Stephen Seidenberg, who I introduced at the start of the show. I was and am absolutely captivated by the way that he sees the world through his pictures, which is peopleless. And I'm not simply talking about landscapes, as you're about to find out. These buildings in Italy, farm buildings that are now, I suppose, ghost houses. Tent cities, minus those who usually live there. It's the afterlives. This is something that comes up during our conversation. The afterlives of abandoned places. Plus the details of life that I think many of us, I do think as photographers, we do see, but they're missed by a lot of people that just walk by every single day. What's that phrase? Or mantra, perhaps, more appropriately in photography? You're looking, but you're not seeing. So here's my guest for part one of our conversation. And I expect to probably invite your thoughts about what makes a real photograph as you hear this today. The first 5 minutes uncover some interesting thoughts about it. Here is Stephen Seidenberg, part one. Stephen, you came to photography through philosophy. I don't get many opportunities to talk to a philosophizing photographer. Try saying that quickly 5 times. But I am intrigued how that all happened, whether it seemed like it was a natural progression or not.
Yes, I suppose for me it felt like an organic regression from philosophy and also poetry. And I continue to be involved in literary worlds and the philosophy world. Much of it has to do with my life as an undergraduate and where I was as an undergraduate at Bard College in upstate New York, where there was a lot of independence allowed in the course, and I was able to be all three of those things, a philosopher, a photographer, and a poet. And a photographer was Stephen Shore, who still teaches there.
Goodness.
So he is my one and only photography teacher in my life, and I wasn't a photography major or anything like that, but I worked with him, and in fact I worked with him less in taking and making pictures than I did in talking about photography, in talking about what the photograph was. And of course, the photograph poses some significant questions and challenges to the philosopher and is reflected in philosophical literature in that way, whether it's Bazin or obviously Barthes, the famous works by such people, or Flusser or Siderall, or any number of people, of great thinkers and interesting thinkers, willing to ask the question what photography means for our understanding of representation in general.
It makes you the perfect guest, actually, doesn't it? Because for an agent, a literary agent that's promoting your books, and there's several of those.
Yes.
You could be on philosophy, poetry, or photographic shows.
Yes, this is true. This is true.
It gives a lot of options. I am intrigued by the philosophy of why we make pictures. Has your approach changed as you've got older and worked more? Inevitably, it's going to.
Yes, of course.
And I'm going to leave the why. We have a big question of why. The overarching why I will leave to the very end, because it's a tail-off question that I use. Okay, but this philosophy of why we make pictures does intrigue me.
Yes, I think I don't know if the why has changed, and also I would say, by the way, and we can talk about this later in the podcast, there are different kinds of pictures, and why we make them for different reasons. Both, I would say, even if one is drawing or painting, if we are not using what Wilhelm Flusser calls the apparatus, there's a difference between taking a photograph and attempting to paint or draw with photographic verisimilitude. It changes the kinds of motivations that people have, in which can often be sort of skill-based or skill-forward in any of these forms. Though obviously in photography, it's become easier and easier to merely make images has become easier and easier, and almost everyone in at least the first world does it now.
Yeah.
Over the age of 8, they make photographs, or they don't make photographs, they make content. I'll make this distinction because I don't consider to be a photographer is to make photographic prints, actual photographs that can be shown, that can be handled, that live outside of the.
So you believe it has to be a physical, tangible, tactile thing to class yourself as a photographer?
Yes, it's not that I'm diminishing what it is to make content for Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or what have you, still images in those contexts. It's just a different thing. So making images for a backlit screen is not directly in conversation with the history of photography. The history of photography is something that happens through making prints in the world. I don't think people have to shoot with film. I don't think they have to print analog in any way, but they have to print in order to be in that conversation.
But isn't that something that's evolutionary though? Because if you think about photography, it starts out with wet plates, collodion, but we're not doing that now. But it doesn't make us any less a photographer. It's just a different methodology.
No. It's a different methodology. I would say that the difference in the digital image as opposed to the physical image is it allows us to be with a physical object that is changing in the way that physical objects change in the world, that is decaying, that is subject to the way that light hits it, that is in relationship to the way in which it's framed, or the passepartout as it's structured in a gallery, say, or in another setting, that can be placed, so to speak, as an object. And that is a different thing. And that is something that is shared by a contemporary, whether it's a giclée print, an inkjet print, or a chromogenic print, or what have you. That's something that is shared with albumin prints and prints on glass and other things from early photography.
So what sort of relationship do you have with your work that appears online that's inevitably going to be only digital?
Yes. Well, I feel like it's...
Is it any less a photograph? Is what I'm
It's
asking.
a different thing than a photograph. Yeah. It's a different thing than a photograph.
What is it? What do we call it then?
I call it content.
Right. Okay.
and if that sounds like I am slightly less compelled by it, it's true. I am less compelled by
intriguing.
it. I recognize it as something I have no choice about in this particular world. I understand that it's a useful way of promoting the work, and I can make files that look good on screen. They're not the same files I print with. I understand that I'm doing something different when I put something in that context, that in order to affect the viewer in some way, in a way that is parallel to the way in which a print can do that, I have to make certain types of changes to the work for the screen, and that's fine. It's and vice versa, and that's actually in certain respects not dissimilar to how, I'm not sure if you print digitally or in a lab, but it's not so dissimilar to how one approaches file adjustment, image adjustment towards specific papers or specific printing processes, things like that.
I'm shifting a bit uncomfortably because I do not print enough. And that has me, when I'm talking to you, think, well, am I making any less of photographic image? You would call it content, and I'm still calling it photography. So
I think that's fine. I call it all. It's all under the aegis of lens-based art. Yeah. Let's call it that. Lens-based artist.
I like this because it feels a challenging notion, I'm sure, to a lot of people listening now who will be thinking, no, I'm a photographer. I may not print, but it doesn't make me any less an observer. Hold on, there's another word. Am I any less an observer because I don't print? That's a different question, isn't it? It
is. And is the process different? I mean, I would say that my process is different, and this is perhaps one of the ways. Well, I'm old enough, you're old enough to have, we're the same age as we established before the podcast started, exactly the same age. And we began in a pre-digital world.
Yes,
We began in the dark room.
Yeah.
And we went through many different stages of the development of digital possibilities. And I shoot digitally, I'll tell you now. I mean, I was shooting with film for a long time, and then I would scan the negatives and then print digitally, because printing digitally, for those who are scared of printing digitally is extraordinarily easy compared to printing through other, and with options that are astounding and give us such flexibility. It's a really fantastic era for making prints. So it's a shame that people are making prints a little less, because there are things that are disappearing, unfortunately. There are fewer and fewer Lambda machines to make chromogenic prints. And though I don't know if you're in London, but London has a number of them, maybe 4 or something like that. Yeah. And I actually often do my C printing in London and have it shipped around the world in various ways, because there are a plethora of such facilities there.
Well, certainly more have closed down, but
yes.
We are blessed with them. There's no doubt about that. And some of the labs that have been around for a long, long time.
The real shit.
Stay with us. Your pictures are peopleless. You were very inspired by Lynn Cohen. I'm going to admit that I was not that aware of Lynn's work. I certainly am now. The late Lynn Cohen, sadly. How did she inspire your work? And perhaps you should probably elaborate a little bit more about her.
Well, Lynn was an extraordinary photographer who did show with many of those the new topographics people in the late 60s, early 70s, with Stephen Shore and Lee Friedlander and Eggleston and Adams, all of these folks. And her work it's quite singular in both, I think, the kind of perfect tonality of its black and white composition, and its focus on spaces, on entirely artificial spaces. Spaces like waiting rooms in doctors' offices or other kinds of office settings, convention centers, training facilities for the police or for other people, the kinds of environments that people might need to work in, or there are waiting rooms or things like that are comically structured to look like they're outdoors.
Well, I think there was one. I called it ducks on a wall. I think there was one. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Things like that. Yeah. There are many great and famous ones. I think flight simulators she photographed. And the ways in which they structure the attempted experience of flight. But at the same time, they are such fine examples of flat field composition and of especially grayscale composition across the field of view. And they are extraordinarily beautiful. So there's something about the way in which she reveals an uncanny world that is generally unseen by us, though we inhabit it all the time. We go through those waiting rooms, we go through those facilities, but we don't look around. And part of it is that she's able to step back, move the people away out of the setting, and photograph it as an entirety, to almost capture the vision of the odd and perhaps even largely unintended vision of its makers.
Well, I was looking at one of Lynn's pictures. I think it was a doctor's waiting room, and it took me back actually 5 years or so when I was sat in a doctor's waiting room during that horrible experience of COVID and pandemic, where you just did not frequent these places. You weren't invited to them. And I happened to find myself in one collecting a prescription, and it was a completely empty room. Every single seat was separated by 2 meters. I was sat there on my own in this quiet room, and I didn't know of Lynn's work then, but that would be a classic Lynn Cohen picture.
Yes, indeed, it would.
The spaces we inhabit, but we weren't inhabiting them.
Right. That's right.
At that time. Right. So it has obviously driven your work, and it's inspired you. Has it been the driving force that's meant that you've ended up making these extraordinary pictures around the world that don't feature people that do make us think about what it might be like if a person was in it?
It's certainly a big influence, but not the only one. I mean, there are other. Stephen Shore, for instance, rarely photographs people, though he has at different times. Robert Adams, aforementioned Robert Adams, the Beckiers with their typologies are certainly a big influence on the way in which I understand how series works and the value of repeated form in making a series. So for me, all of these predecessors help to inform the conceptual work that structures the photographic series for me. So for me, I would say that being a photographer is a kind of conceptual art, in a way that shares a lot with other forms of conceptual art.
Abstraction. It's
abstraction, but it is also, as some conceptual artists that use text, for instance, it also has a linearity to it. It's because I'm also an indexical photographer. I am photographing the world. There's a whole, I think, generation of lens-based artists coming from art schools now who are essentially photographing and then collaging their photographs in various ways, either digitally or through print, or they are making photo. It's this inversion of indexicality by virtue of the question about whether or not the photograph can be seen as an indexical trace of the world that it's photographed.
Indexical, I'm trying to just land on this word and understand it.
And forgive me, it's in much of the philosophical literature about photography, and it really comes from an American philosopher named Charles Peirce, who is the beginning of semiotics. And the index in Peirce is something that indicates a causal relation, that indicates some causality that may not be seen. So, an example might be you see an apple with a bite taken out of it is an index for someone who was there, who bit it, who had a bite. You don't see an apple with a bite taken out of it and not assume that there was a person there who took the bite. And for much of the history of photography, there's always been photographic manipulation that might cause us to question indexicality. But nonetheless, unlike today, where we can have entirely generated photos with no lens at all and no world at all, essentially, the photograph served as a kind of index for what it was photographing, a sort of way of saying, yes, this was there, light reflected off of it, came through this lens, exposed this chemically sensitive film, and this is how we end up with this thing, right? Yeah. Different from a painting, from other kinds of art. There was nothing before that let us do that. There are photographers who have a documentary element, and I do in my work, though it's not exclusively documentary. It's obviously fine art photography. It's not a journalistic approach. And there are photographers who simply are not asking those questions with their work, which neither here nor there. Alternative process people who don't use a lens at all, who are just exposing the photosensitive paper in various ways. I suppose you might describe AI-generated photos as alternative process at this point. We don't even have to call them photos, but they're something else. I did AI-generated images that appear photographic. And equally, people who might photograph to express their feelings. So these, I feel sad. These are sad. These are images that where the light evokes the kind of sadness that I feel.
You've entered into another territory, actually, AI. Yes. You started it, not me.
Well, we don't have to talk about it much.
I will mention it, and then we'll move on to something else. But I suppose really the conversation here is about truth, isn't it? I think that's the problem that many photographers or creatives or whoever have with AI created photographs or images, because it's not necessarily the truth. So AI, Where does it land?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it remains to be seen where it lands. It will be interesting, I think, when people start, and they have, of course, in different contexts, making prints from AI generated images, and what those prints do and how we are able to use them. I mean, I think that there are possibilities that are certainly, it's not like, I certainly don't feel that AI can't be used artistically, that you can't make images that are, there will be artists who primarily generate images through AI who are effective in making us feel, in making us question, in pointing us in new and interesting directions. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure people's beef, though, is necessarily with how good it is and how representative it can be. I think people's issues, if we can call it an issue, is with the fact that it's not the truth.
Yes. I mean, now, talking about speaking, it's what, and of course, the photograph is not the truth either. It suggests the truth, we think. So we understand it to be indexical in the way we were talking about earlier, as having a causal relationship with the world. But of course, within these radical parameters that as photographers, we set for our own purposes, and to evoke different kinds of emotional responses as well as intellectual responses. So it's interesting to understand the ways in which, as photographers, especially as photographers who are attempting something other, even when it's documentary, something other than photojournalism, we are pushing away from a truth that isn't overburdened by ideological claims. They don't have to be political claims. They don't have to be even systematic or entirely describable claims, but by the kinds of claims we make when, as writers, as whatever, we change the world into this flat two-dimensional space that has elements of composition that we don't see, like depth of field, for instance, and the ways in which we're able to manipulate light.
That's true. That's true.
We have to manipulate light, and I've never seen in black and white. And I do photograph in black and white, not exclusively, but photography begins with a radical transformation of the world into two dimensions and without color, and recognizing the ways in which that allows us to see something else in the world that we didn't see before. I think, and of course, it was used for the same kinds of manipulative purposes that, as soon as people started knowing how to use it, that AI is used for now, that we see obviously every day with in the US, with our radically and proudly prevaricating administration at the moment, for instance. The point is, it would be in some contexts, some notion of verisimilitude is a kind of violation of political principle, one gets the sense. You especially don't want people to have a sense of what's actually happening or how it might be to experience the world in certain circumstances.
And Steven Seidenberg is back for part 2 of our conversation shortly. But he's actually back on the Extra Mile edition this week, which is our Patreon-only show. You go the extra mile for me, so I go the extra mile for you. And to thank you, I make an extra, shorter show each week so we can walk a bit further together. I decided to ask Steven 5 quick or not so quick fire questions, broader questions about the philosophy of photography, which I think is reasonably enlightening, actually.
On this week's Extra Mile.
If I show you a photograph that might be quite memorable for me of my wedding or some other kind of occasion that involves family and so on, you just see a generic wedding. It would not provoke, it might provoke a memory of your own similar occasions, but it wouldn't by any means provoke the same memory with the same people or anything like that.
If you'd like to hear a little more photo walk each week, head to the website click Extra Mile or tap the orange Support the Show button on the front page of the website, because your support keeps these walks happening. And one last nudge. Did I nudge you last week? If I didn't, I apologise. I'll nudge you now. Our monthly live Zoom meetup in Vision takes place this coming Tuesday. Invites have gone out. So if you fancy some shared company and a good chat about photography, you'd be very welcome. Before we go further, a quick heads up. The letter I'm about to read on the show talks honestly about mental health, neurodiversity, and includes reference to suicide and thoughts of. It's handled with care, but if those subjects are close to home for you, you might want to give this part a miss or come back to it when the time feels right. Oh, it's brook-tastic, this walk. Although I don't think this one's supposed to be here. See, the rain of late. Here we go, another jump. 1, 2, 3. That's not really a jump, that one. Up the bank on the other side. So this letter sits with some of the most honest mails I think we've received, and I always... Oh, blimey, the wind's just started as well. Let's get some... try and get some cover. And I'm always surprised by the honesty that you are prepared to share with your letters. I really am. Privileged is the word. And I'm genuinely moved by what you share. This is from Andrew Larking. I just caught your latest podcast and you were talking about autism. This is a long message. Grab wine and slippers. Andrew, not where I'm stood right now. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with reactive stress. I'd witnessed a traumatic suicide up close. My father was unwell. My job was, still is, high stress. And my doctor said, look, that's just too much for you to cope with. You need help. Being stubborn and ashamed, I ignored her, refused medication, and just carried on. Depression, you see, is for the weak. Slowly letting things get worse and drinking wine to hide the worst of it, I pretended to forget. 6 months later, I was told I was autistic and had ADHD. At 45 years old. Very quickly, much about my life and personality made sense. I felt temporarily lifted, and in the 18 months since then, I've slowly unmasked, gently in places, and only in comfortable moments. And I carried on. Otherwise, I kept things internal. I reflected deeply on who I am and how I process the world. I remained highly self-critical. My confidence kept dropping, and even my body started to feel heavy and slow as I lost weight. In the months after the neurodiversity conversation, I made an unpleasant set of discoveries. First, I can't remember ever being happy. I couldn't even describe what it means to be happy. If I mapped my mood swings, which, being a little over-analytical, I have, the highest points would be below the median for a healthy-minded average person, and the low points would be off the chart low. So when I'm at my happiest, I'd be you if you were a bit down. Second, I can remember learning to appear happy. I can point to the moments in childhood where I made the most progress in my acting normal. I have pictures, actual photographs of some of these moments. I can speak to examples when it fell apart and I raged out, leaving my family confused at my outburst. All those moments through my life, if I piece them into a linear path, make me who I am today. If you take my neurodiversity into account, they make sense. But who I am today, the seemingly happy man, is not a genuine person. I am a person who learned to act happy in order to survive, and that scares the shit out of me. Third, I've wondered many times if the lives of my family would be simpler in the long term if I wasn't here. I appreciate the short-term impact of my actions would be difficult, and deep down, I know they'd carry on without end. And it's this that keeps me around. I'd happily not be here. I'm tired, but I have to be here to reduce the harm I cause. Of course, I ignored this until I knew I no longer could. And at that point, I went to see the doctor and did what I was told. I'm now on medication. I talk about things openly, and I take each day as it comes. It was the best decision I could have made, even though life remains a hard choice. So why am I here? The moment when my mood is the highest is when I'm walking, listening to music, looking for pictures. And this is when I want to remain among the breathing. This is why I make photographs. The process is enjoyable. The people I choose to meet are interesting. The places I choose to see are visually appealing and often quite empty. The challenge of documenting them so that the pictures reflect how I felt whilst I was there occupies my mind completely. The entire process, apart from the editing of colour, of making photographs is calming and joyful. The sounds, the tactility, the obsession, the walking, I love it. I love making pictures. And each day I spend doing it makes me a little closer to recovery. And recently, I've had you and your guests in my ear, so thanks for that too. My website is brand new, and I'm adding pictures slowly, but it's at andrewlarking.co.uk. I will, of course, put that link on the show page today. But, and that was it. That was the letter. Andrew, goodness, thank you. Whew. As I say, wind out of sails. It really, when you sent this letter in, I read it. It was quite late into the evening, a few evenings ago. And I read it once, twice, 3 times. And this idea of learning to perform happiness rather than feel, I'm sure it will ring bells for a lot of people listening, whether they've had a diagnosis of ADHD or another form of autism or not. And photography making total sense in all of this is something that we talk about often, I know. For some people, and I'm thinking of those who've written in, photography isn't simply a hobby, it is quite literally a lifeline. And I know literally can be an overused word, but I think in this sense I'm using it entirely correctly. So I'm never quite sure what to say at moments like this, and I'm never sure actually whether you necessarily need me to. I'm pleased to have read it out and for it to have connected with other people. I did write back to Andrew actually and say, are you happy for me to read this out? Because it is very personal, and he said yes. And I appreciate it covers topics that some people may find obviously very, very difficult from their own life experiences. So I'm really glad you went back to your doctor and took the help. I'm obviously very glad you're still here, goodness, obviously. And I'm glad that photography gives you a reason to. So thank you. Thank you for your honesty. And it's a letter that I'm certainly going to reflect upon. If you'd like to write into the show, I'd love to hear from you. The letters we receive, the sheer variety of conversations and the plethora of different topics and subjects is frankly incredible. I definitely feel all the richer for presenting this podcast and for being a part of this community with you. I genuinely do. So the email address is stories@photowalk.show. stories@photowalk.show. We're rejoining Stephen soon. First up, it's a short letter actually, this one from Jim Farmer. I know I often muse as I take my walks along the canal and look across to what I wildly and totally inaccurately call the swamp. that notwithstanding old tree roots across the path and the occasional horsefly, let's be honest. When you're walking in the UK, it doesn't bring with it the chance of meeting something that's likely to eat you. There are toy poodles, but that's for another day. But some of the letters you send in from your parts of the world as you're out on your own walks make it very clear that beasties like bears and snakes and gators and crocs are just a part of your day-to-day and a part of your walk. For example, our Valerie Jardin, talks about, is it coyotes? I think it is, isn't it, Valerie? She tends to stay away at certain times of the year from some of the walks she makes when she's taking her dog Luna out. And Bob of the Desert, yes. Bob, we haven't heard from you for, 2-3 weeks now? Perhaps longer. Are you okay? I want to check. Never mind the jumping choirs that he's talked about in the past. He has to be very careful when he treads off the beaten path in Tucson and Arizona for things that rattle. And then Jim Farmer sent me this, which will be on the show page, the picture that he sent me. It's a sketchbook photograph of the moment. But when I looked at this, I thought, oh my word, they are walking around your neighbourhood? A gator came for breakfast. Good morning, Neil. Heard you mention alligators this morning and thought to send you this gator that our plant manager found yesterday early doors on the back road to our plant. It's about 4 feet long and he just picked it up by the tail. What? I mean, these things move fairly briskly, don't they? Not sure I'd be picking one up by the tail, honestly. Our ponds have been taken over by gators over the last 40 years or so. There were none here when I was little, so we put him back in the pond before some of my employees got the idea of a nice belt or boots or something. You put him back in the pond? Well, when I think of ponds, I'm thinking of sort of countryside village ponds that we have in the UK. I can't imagine an alligator just swimming around in the pond. Can't imagine the ducks that we have in said ponds in beautiful chocolate box English villages would be too happy about it either. Another workplace hazard, he says, ! I'd put several more after that sentence if I were you. Have a great weekend. Jim Farmer. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the picture. I remember in the Gambia, so it won't be alligators, this will be crocs. And I don't mean the ones you put on your feet. With our friend Jason Florio. When I first met Jason, so it's a good few years back now, and he invited me for a drink at it was by the sea in a village where he was living. What was the name of the village? Not Samyang. Anyway, he invited me, Cape something. Anyway, he invited me for a drink and I went to meet this extraordinary photographer that we've got to know well on this show, and of course he's been to us with India last year as well, and Africa the year before, West Africa and the Gambia, and we sat having a beer next to the beach, and there was not far away there was a sign and it said, "Beware of the crocodiles." And I said, "Jason, there won't be crocodiles walking around the grounds, will they?" He said, "Yeah, it's dark." He said, "Be careful where you tread." I can tell you, every single time, the rain's getting really bad, I want to go and put myself under a tree. Otherwise you are going to hear pitter-patter sounds all the time. Every time I went to the loo that day, that night rather, I was very cautious where I trod. So thank you, Jim, for that. Anyway, time to rejoin, I think, my guest today, Stephen Seidenberg, photographer, poet, philosopher. In fact, before part 2, I did ask if we could play a little of Stephen's poetry. So here it is, Stephen Seidenberg at the Poetry Centre, and then part 2.
There was a sun the other day. He felt its weight upon his back. But even in the living of that moment, he still rightly failed to think that mass an attribute of anything but his deferred reception, of his burden in its hauling, a fantasy of ballast that seemed sweet as it reached tongue.
Let's talk for a moment about a new solo exhibition you've got called Home Truth Image Making in Absence. It's about the afterlives of lived spaces. I suppose if you looked at it with and talked about it in modern parlance, it would be like urbex. When you step into a place that was once full of people and life and whatever, and now it's no longer.
Yes.
Now you've travelled across the world doing this. I'm intrigued how you find these places. For starters, there doesn't appear to be an encyclopedia of places that are no longer loved.
Yes. No. Well, there isn't, and you stumble on them. Really, it is that sometimes as you become more experienced in this sort of things, people draw your attention to them. Right, and I'm not so interested in in merely abandoned photographs of abandonment. Obviously, and in fact it's interesting. One of those the show encompasses 3 different series. One is these actually abandoned farmhouses that are part of this post-war land reform movement in Basilicata in Puglia. Then. In outside of Rome, a tent city, which was fully inhabited at the time of my photographing there, though is now was destroyed shortly thereafter. And then these empty lots and sort of spaces of clearing in the city of Kanazawa, Japan. So there is a sense. I am obviously in all of my photography making them feel abandoned. I'm making sure that there are no people in the photos. There are often many people around when I'm photographing, and I will wait around until I can structure a setting where I can get the shot I'm looking for and make the composition I'm looking for without any intrusion of actual human presence.
Well, that tent city, if you like, I can't imagine that. Well, it must have been very difficult to find a time when you could photograph that. That was to me the most eerie of all the places.
Yeah, it's a strange setting. It's an uncanny setting for anyone living in a place like that. It was difficult. Well, it was difficult to find a mechanism of permission to take those photographs, to feel fully. I mean, we were able to. Ultimately, I was able to I only photographed where there was permission. And in the case of a place like that, the people don't want to be photographed. As opposed to many other settings where sometimes people want to be in photographs nowadays. They think you're doing something for social media or whatever they can find themselves. So it can be more difficult to push people out of push them out of the photographs, to find a moment when they're not in the photographs. Essentially, if someone in that setting of this tent city called Baobab, if someone gave me permission to photograph their living space, how they were living, what they were doing, then they were absenting themselves from the frame. And the difficulty was getting those permissions and gaining the trust of people which took many months of conversation. And in part, the fact that I don't feature people in any of my photography made it easier for me. They were able to look on their phones at my website or what have you and see that there wasn't a single photograph of a person. So they didn't have to fear being photographed.
I'll of course leave links to this work on the show page today. And that tent city, as I say, is a truly haunting place when it's devoid of people in it. And then you've got the Italian farmhouses that were once busy and populated, but now have nobody in them, and they stretch across these vast plains. And you've photographed them as these empty spaces, perhaps you could tell us about the politics of it, actually, because this is quite a political story of why these farmhouses that you found in Italy were completely abandoned.
Yes, went hideously wrong for the people who were moved through them. A government experiment by the newly formed post-war Italian Republic, funded by the Marshall Plan. So it was really an attempt by the Americans and the Allies to appropriate ideologies that they saw coming from the far left, from the communists in particular, who had a strong presence in Italy also, and promising land redistribution to peasants who had worked the land under the broad context of these baronial estates and harvesting in places called masseria for generations, since really it was still a kind of feudal agriculture.
So the idea was that the people would frequent these farmhouses, and as far as you see,
they were built for people.
And they undulate with the land around them.
Yes,
and now it's,
and they're like suburban developments, but there's no urban nearby. It's
an empty nest.
Yes, and with certain types of promises, like, I mean, this went from 52 to 72, I think, are the dates.
Wow, okay, quite a while.
So it went quite late, and even up through 72, they were people who were given those houses, who were given a kind of period of grace where they didn't have to pay at all, and then would be renting to own for 20 or 30 years was the idea. Yeah. But even at that point, they were often given a house that didn't have electricity, didn't have running water, and 2 oxen. They would be given 2 oxen to go with that.
That's very specific.
Yes, and small plots of land that really couldn't generate enough, without that are good for, that are grassland essentially, so good for growing grain, but not able to, which, say, 6 acres of grain does not support a family for a year. Mm-hmm. And so with irrigation and modern equipment, people can make those small plots into actual possible living farm lives, but the irrigation never came, so it never became possible to plant crops that would produce more value for the occupants. So people would move from their villages into these isolated settings with people they didn't know in the nearest farmhouse, which might be a considerable distance, and separated from their familial and other kinds of communities that had been with them for generations. And then they would fail within a few years as soon as they started to have to pay. So the land, which had been a part of it, is the government also confiscated land from the big estates that was generally the least productive land. So the land that was
the unwanted land,
right? The unwanted land on the edges of those estates. And all of that land would ultimately, once the farmers who had been given the land were unable to work it productively for themselves or survivably for themselves, they moved to the north, often to the industrializing north, or to Germany or to the United States, some to Britain, I'm sure, and this long exodus of people from the Italian South to the rest of the world as part of that, a wave of that. And the land reverted back to government ownership. And then the government sold the land to big companies, big grain companies, pasta companies, say, like Barilla or De Cecco or other companies like that. So from the government perspective, it was actually a big success. It increased yields. It essentially converted this feudal agricultural system to a modern corporate agricultural system in a 20-year period, but at the expense of these people whose lives were radically transformed in the ways that migrants' lives are often transformed. They became internal migrants or migrants to other countries. And those migrations, one of the interesting things and one of the interesting ways in which we were able to make connections within the communities of contemporary migrant communities from around the world in and around Rome was this connection we were drawing between the ways in which the post-war Italian government were treating Italian citizens and how they were now treating people from other countries who were entering the country, which is quite parallel. Citizenship is not a guarantee that you are not being treated in exactly the same way that we see migrants from around the world being, or mistreated the way that we see migrants from around the world being treated now.
So some very awkward parallels within this conversation, isn't there?
Yes, indeed.
The work that you recorded in Japan, was that a similar relationship in terms of how the spaces were created, or the emptiness was created?
Yeah, Japan is a very particular demographic situation, diminishing population, and also a population that sees most work happening in Tokyo and environs and Osaka and environs. So many other cities, I mean, small for Japan, like Kanazawa, which at one point I think was perhaps 500,000 people and is now, it has diminished to, say, 300 to 350,000 people.
Oh, goodness.
You through both of these demographic shifts means that there are a lot of empty houses and abandoned houses, and it also means that land doesn't have much value in those places. So now Kanazawa is an interesting city in part, and an important cultural city for the Japanese, as the second largest city after Kyoto that was never bombed and never burned due to fire. And it has a deep history in with respect to the consolidation of power in modern Japan and the shogunate and other things that happened over the centuries in that city. And it's still seen as a center of craft, and it has one of the only dedicated museums of contemporary art, essentially, or of 21st century art, as they call it, 20th and 21st century art, in Japan. So it has a lot going on, but it also has, and it has some of the oldest districts of historic preservation in Japan. There's a tea district and a geisha district and a couple of areas that are of great significance. So there's a Shinkansen from Tokyo, a fast train from Tokyo to get to Kanazawa. And people, Japanese tourists, flock there in the nice weather. And but when people move out of these old houses, there aren't the skilled workers to repair them, to restore them, and it's expensive, and the land is not so valuable, so people tear them down. Often, or they allow them to fall into great disrepair. And so the city has all of these void spaces in a way that I found quite interesting and compelling visually.
They're very compelling, yes. Are they also a bit melancholic?
Yes, I would say so. There's certainly... it's certainly a series about absence, and it is a monochrome series. But the two other series we've talked about are color series, that is a monochrome series.
Yeah. Can I talk about detail? You are a man with an eye for detail. Forest beach bollards, and also things like Rome squares. This is scenery. These are scenes that one might walk past quite easily. I think photographers do see things with a very different eye, and in particular, I was thinking the other day, I mentioned it to a colleague of mine. I said, casting your mind back again to COVID, you'll remember tapes on the floor, and of course you've got the tapes on the floor in Japan as well, haven't you?
Yes.
But tapes on the floor. Yeah. With the 2 meter separation. I think it started with 5 and then it was 2, and then there were slight COVID warnings. And I only thought about this the other day because down at the one of the centres where I walk my dog in quite often, there's still some scratched tapes and things there. Yes. And now they're far more interesting. I think when they were first there 2, 3, 4 years ago, when you could visually read them very well, they were, I don't like those. But now they're far more intriguing for the scratchy residue that's left.
Yes, I agree, and I do have that series that you referred to in Tokyo, the Tokyo tape. It was before COVID, and in Japan they use this kind of very strong adhesive tape for all kinds of purposes on the floors of especially the subway stations, but in other places too. But I was photographing in the subway and essentially finding these remnants, sometimes sometimes the fully functional or recent editions could also be quite compelling and can be quite compelling depending on, I mean, they can be funny, they can be absurd, arrows that point in all directions at the same time with no apparent character. And part of that can be one of the things a photographer does. Like, as we were talking about with Lynn's work earlier, you can, even if it's contextual, you see a joke, you see a visual joke by decontextualizing something that in context might go completely unnoticed. It's something that I do all the time with all of the kinds of series you're talking about. These are, as you say, the unseen, the things that people walk past. I don't know if you looked at the cheekily named London Calling series.
I did. Yes.
Yeah. And it's something that people simply don't see. These little plastic grates that are leftovers of a previous regime of gas pipeline, I guess, in London. And they decay, and the decay is interesting. They become these little types of gardens and so on. And people walk past them. They don't seem, part of it is they're relatively small, so I'm changing the scale, as the photographers have this way of changing truth by allowing us to experience things in ways that are impossible otherwise. And lenses can do this, whether it's in photography or with a telescope or a microscope. These are not organic ways of seeing. They're not possible ways of seeing, even for us, given the natural apparatus of the eye. And so we play with that. I am particularly drawn, as you were suggesting, to these moments where I can reveal things that people who are around them all the time have never seen.
Your writing and your photography do feel to me like two separate worlds now.
Yeah.
And you, on your website, they are purposefully separated. But I wonder why, because they can cohabitate, can't they?
They can. They're parallel but separate. They're separate in part for me because it helps me to keep them separate. It helps me with each because invariably I am sick of one or the other at any given moment.
Oh, and so it gives you a crossover opportunity to do something else.
And it's a different way of thinking.
Yes,
a radically different way of thinking. It's one of the privileges of having other people look at and write about your work is that you don't have to write about it yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't have to. I don't. For me, because of there are a lot of artists who use words and images together in ways that I find very effective. I feel like I get great pleasure and interest in specifically not doing that in my work, not adding a narrative or a syntactical structure to the work other than what happens through, say, the image itself, by the movement within the composition, or by virtue of the way in which the image is in a series.
Well, talking about other voices in terms of looking or talking about your work, Distant Voices was a book about you and your work. And does it feel strange seeing or reading a whole book of people analysing your work?
Yes.
Is it is it uncomfortable or? No,
it's not uncomfortable, but it is strange. I mean, it can be thrilling at times because and this is true even with a review of a show or a review of a book, or things like, or an essay about that includes some reference to something like that. You see the work in a new way, and for me, I would say it's one of the great joys of being an artist in any of these forms is having someone else reveal to me what I meant and how I meant and how I effectively did what I was doing, and which can often inform future work, but also can shift the ways in which I understand what it is to make work.
Well, I did say near the start of our conversation that I have this tail end question, which is why. And it's more of a personal why. It's a why do you do it? Why, what does this mean? Why joining all the jigsaw bits together?
Right.
Why?
There is a I'll say, in the broadest possible sense, there is a kind of reciprocity. So there's a quote by the writer Saul Bellow, the American novelist Saul Bellow, whose work I don't love, but I like this. He said that a writer is a reader moved to emulation. And I would change it a little bit and say a reader, and this is true as a photographer too, is someone who sees images or who reads work and is moved to reciprocity. The experience is so thrilling and so extraordinary and so transformative. You understand almost a responsibility to make that experience happen for others, and you start thinking about it. I mean, if the experience is ecstatic enough, which it is for me in seeing work that I love or reading work that I love, then you start to think how to do it. What made this happen? How is it possible? How can I do this? How can I provide this in the same way? And so that's the beginning of it, I think, for me.
Is reciprocity service?
In a very abstract way. In a very abstract way. I'm not going to say that I'm not going to describe my art practice as a kind of as a public service. That seems absurd to me. But it feels like it's a relational act that understands and attempts to understand. This is another aspect of it. Of what it is to be an artist, as opposed to in whatever form, is trying to understand and even, let us say, create your interlocutor through your art, to transform the person into the ideal interlocutor, and their transformation back to you is also interesting, into their ideal artist.
And my thanks today to Steven Seidenberg. As I said earlier, we're back with him for the extra mile. So if you can't wait until next Friday and want to walk a little bit further together, then that's what the extra mile is all about. On Reflections today, it's a reflection called You Stupid Boy. God, this rain. Can you hear it? Hang on. Oh, I'm absolutely soaked. Whew. Next Thursday, please, can we have a day that doesn't have rain? Please, can I just order that up now? Actually, talking of next week, an altogether different week. It's more of a letters week next week. It's also Street Talk. Valerie is here for her monthly Teach Me Street. And I have a chat with Gary Williams, who is a good friend of the show and one of our very valued community members. He is a professional singer. I didn't know, actually, he'd sung at Buckingham Palace. But he's also, I'm not sure the word is realigning. I'm going to use the word realigning. He's also realigning in terms of his career. And he's been realigning or reinventing himself in terms of photography, and has found that the micro wedding is giving him, not gifting, he's worked bloody hard for this, a full-time salary where he wasn't quite expecting it. And he's doing really well at it. So I had a chat with him about that, and that'll be on next week's show. So mailbag, street, and micro weddings. Very different. I have a song in a moment which is aptly titled Breathe. Should just be called Rain. By an artist called Gabriella Francis. I'm not sure that we played this one before. If we have, I don't apologise, because it's a fantastic song, and it feels to me like the kind of tune that invites you just to settle. And we've certainly had some heavier content on today's show, so there's lots to think about. I appreciate and thank you to all those that have written in this week with their thoughts, particularly on Carl McNaughton's show. God, I've got rain in my eye now. This is unbelievable. My postscript is in a moment, but a hearty thanks, first of all, to all those who give their time to help this show reach the ears of those of our very special community. More than a nod to Neil Ford for making sure IT does not have a wobble, and if it does, he sorts it. Andrea Gilpin minds Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell, the same for Facebook. Kelvin Brown runs the Flickr group, and Michael Brennan rounds things off nicely with a Spotify playlist. So I was going to take a final sketchbook photograph, but it's raining so much, I'll put the camera away. I want to take this to Bangladesh and India. I do not want it to be in the repair shop. So a postscript for the show. Today it's from Cecil Beaton, who of course was mentioned nearer the start of the show. A British photographer, diarist, designer, best known for his portraits of artists, actors and royalty, don't you know, and for shaping how glamour looked through much of the 20th century. And he said this. Actually, there's two things. I wrote both down here. People, I like this as a PS, but I've got another one too. People are more interesting than perfection. Now, isn't that true? But this is the one I'm going to use as this week's PS. Be daring. Be different. Be impractical. Be anything that will assert integrity of purpose and imaginative vision against the play it safers.
September comes, summer is gone. Do you think of me when you're trying to sleep? I'll admit you're getting pretty hard to miss. How did it end like this? But while there's stars above you, I'll be here to love you, if you know what I mean. All of our dreams scattered here like fallen leaves, till I can't breathe. All of our dreams scattered here like fallen leaves, till I can't breathe. All of our dreams scattered here like fallen leaves, till I can't breathe. All of our dreams scattered here like fallen leaves, till I can't breathe.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.